Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I just wanted to do a fun little speed draw for you guys today. This is some fan art that I did for a manga series that I loved as a kid. It's actually the only collection that I still have that I carried into adulthood. The series is called Plus Anima. It's a coming of age story about these 4 kids with animal powers, and you sort of explore their world and explore their powers with them as they sort of figure out who they are and how they fit into this life of theirs. And the character that I wanted to draw today is Nana. She has bat powers, so she gets these big ears to hear better. She uses echolocation, and she can fly with big bat wings, which is really interesting because it contradicts her personal style. She wears a lot of like pink, very frilly, very girly outfits. And it's a point of contention for her in the series because she, even though these bat powers have helped her through a lot, she doesn't like them because it clashes so much with her aesthetic. And as a warning, with all my speed drawings, the canvas is going to be moving around and flashing a lot. If you are sensitive to that, but you do want to stay, the canvas to the right-hand side of the screen is going to be stationary, whereas the one to the left is the one that's going to be flashing around. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So right off the bat with the posing, I didn't want to do anything too dynamic. I didn't really want to do an action pose or something. I just wanted something very posed and practiced to show off the big ears and the bat wings because I thought that would be a very interesting juxtaposition to the pink frilly dress that she's going to be wearing. But at the same time, I did want to add some movement to it, so I decided to go for this kind of very innocent, looking coyly over the shoulder, but the body is still turning so that we get the fluidity and the movement in the ruffles of the dress. And I'm going to add some underskirts there to really billow it out and add some interest to that underside as well. The line art for this one, I didn't want to go too thin, but I did want to do something a little more delicate than my usual line art. I usually do very heavy, very thick and dark line art, and for this one, because the character is so dainty and so feminine, I wanted to do a little bit more of almost a Japanese-inspired line art, sort of manga-esque, where they do have the line weight, but overall the intensity of the line art is much lighter and much thinner. And then, of course, just doing in some details on the fabric here. I've been doing a lot of work and a lot of practice with making folds, like directional folds in fabric, look realistic, look like they're actually going the direction they should be going. But for this one, I kind of set that research to the side a little bit because I did want it to look a little more fantastical, a little softer, and I didn't want to stick to the rigidity of the studies that I had just done. I wanted to make it a little more flowy than reality would have given me. And then with the hair, the one thing that I really kept in mind was I wanted to keep the detail to a minimum because I knew I was going to be going in with a very light color for her hair. She does have a very light doll-like blonde color in the manga. But at the same time, I wanted those ringlets to be very defined so that you could very easily see the shape of the hair, even though it's all going to be one color. And then, of course, the skirt here, I did outline it very simply at first, and then I decided I wanted a little bit more detail on the bottom because the ringlets and the bow and the fabrics were taking up so much intrigue at the top of the piece that I decided to go in and add a couple little underskirts with a lot of ruffles on them to add a bit of interest to it. You can see I started off with something very simple, very sketchy, and then I decided I had to go all in on this one and sketch out every single ruffle, every single pleat to really get the effect that I wanted. So this, I'm going to say, was a very long process with not too much reward to it. I did initially go in with like the first outer layer of the ruffles, and then after I got that done, I said, nope, it still needs a little bit more something. It needs a little more detail to match the bottom half of the picture to the top half in the amount of line art that I had going on. So after that first sort of ruffle layer was done, I then went in with a second ruffle layer to, which I actually put on top of it, I'm just now noticing, just to kind of add that extra line art, that busyness, so that the top half of the portrait and the bottom half matched as far as how intricate the design was. And as you can see, I did spend a lot of time on this. As far as the technique that I use, there isn't one specific technique that I can give you that would make this easier. I just went in and individually lined every single pleat to give it that really precise feel that I was wanting. And then after all the pleats were done, I added a little bit of poofiness to the skirt to kind of make it look like the fabric was pooling around the seams. And I think that added just enough interest to the bottom to match the top, and I went ahead with coloring. So the blush technique that I'm doing here is basically I'm taking the skin color and I'm coloring in all the areas that I want to have blush on it. And then once that's finished, I'll clip the blush layer to the skin layer and then just color adjust until I find the right tone. Usually by darkening it a little bit, adding some saturation, and then turning the dial all the way down to a red hue instead of the normal like peach orange hue that I'll use for skin. And then for the bat wings, instead of doing a stark black or gray, I went ahead and did a purple to match the bow and later the dress, which I knew were both going to be in the pink color family. And then as always, I'm just blocking in all those colors before even starting the shading or the highlighting. This is just the technique that I use. It's what I'm used to. I'll do all the base colors first. And then once those are all done, color adjust if I need to, and then, and only then, I'll start working on the shading and highlighting. And that's just because of the way that I organize my layers. I've got all the colors in one folder, and then once I close that folder, I would rather not go back into it to try and adjust the colors again if I don't have to. So I like to get all the colors out of the way first, and then go in and start shading. I believe I'm shading here with a sort of dusty purple color, and I later realized I really didn't like that, so I changed it to a dusty pink color to give it a little bit more warmth and to complement the pink hues that are already going on in this piece. Once again, spending a lot of time on the hair, even though I told myself I wouldn't do that because I need to get the rest of this piece finished, but now that that's done, and then I'll go in and spend even more time on these bat wings because I really couldn't decide how I wanted to do them, whether I wanted to do sort of a shiny texture, a more matte texture, and then if I was going to do one or the other, how detailed I wanted it to be. I ended up trying to go with a little bit of like a velvety texture, so not too shiny, not too matte. And then looking at this, I don't think the detail is at the level that I truly want it to be because it does seem kind of separated from the rest of the piece, the details in the rest of the piece, but I am overall happy with the effect that I managed to achieve. God, and we are not even close to finishing with just the cell shading yet. I still have to do all the ruffles on the edge of the dress, all the folds in the clothing. Really, the cell shading in this, I think, just took an unbelievable amount of time. Usually, cell shading is what takes me the least amount of time. Line art usually takes me the most. But the line art, for some reason, I feel like went really quickly on this, even with those little ruffles at the bottom. And then this is the part that really ate up my time on the shading, is having to shade each individual little fold in the pleats on the bottom of the skirt. But I think the end result was pretty worth it. I think it turned out really, really cool, so I am happy with it. Now, in shading these pleats, I didn't have a very specific technique that I was using. I mostly tried to shade any part that folded under and then left any part that was folding over and facing the viewer a natural color unshaded. But that didn't quite work on all of them. There were some parts that were touching already shaded parts or lightened parts that were touching light parts. So I had to make sort of a judgment call on which parts should be shaded and which parts shouldn't to make it look like a cohesive piece in general. And then after the cell shading, I go ahead and move on to the soft shading. This is something that I do only on bigger pieces. On my smaller pieces, I'll skip this step just entirely and opt for cell shading and cell highlighting. I like the look of that, but on these big pieces, when I really want it to look like I've put a lot of effort into it, I'll go in with the smooth shading because I just think it adds a little bit of softness and a little bit of extra dimension to the piece that you just can't achieve with the cell shading. And then I said earlier that once the colors are done, I don't like going back in and adjusting them, but sometimes it's unavoidable. Like, for example, I did change her hair color a while back to be a little less saturated because I found it was fighting against the colors of the bow and the dress. And I think just by desaturating it and lightening it a little bit, it really sort of blends into the character instead of standing out too much, which it was doing earlier. And then the last step of the actual drawing here is my favorite part, adding the highlights. I went in on every single ringlet and individually highlighted them, again, to separate them, make them stand out and be a lot more defined, which is what I wanted. I wanted sort of really shiny, really defined ringlets. And then just going in and adding a very, very, very small highlight to the edges of everything, in addition to a softer highlight that sort of enhances the inner areas like the cheeks, the nose, the lips, stuff like that. And then the very final steps here, just to make the whole piece pop off of the background, I do this when I don't have a very detailed background on my pieces, is just to add that very dark, very intense outline around the whole piece. I think it just makes it stand out. It makes it look like a finished piece, and I love adding it to all my less detailed, less involved pieces. And that is the finished piece. That is Nana from the manga series plus Anima. I had a lot of fun on this one. I really, really loved doing the ruffles, even though they took so much time. I think it added such a cool effect to the final piece. And I really don't get to do fan art that often. So this was just a fun little relaxing piece that I got to do of something that I really, really enjoyed and was a big part of my childhood. So if you want to see the full piece, you can find it on my Instagram. Other than that, if you would like to follow me on my socials, I am on Patreon, TikTok, and now on Twitch. And make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can find your way back here for next week's video. I love you all so much. Bye.